Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you 4 different soup recipes that I have been whipping up this winter, and they are all made with whole food ingredients, including bone broth, which is really nutrient dense. And so the first one I'm making here is a chicken marsala soup, and it's not masala like the Indian recipe, but this is like a Italian recipe, and it's made with marsala wine. That's why it's called marsala soup. And it has veggies, bone broth, marsala wine, and I'm adding some chicken here. And then you let that cook, and then once it's cooked, I'm going to add a few more things here, including some cream and some gnocchi. And I love gnocchi, my kids love gnocchi. We get a gluten-free gnocchi so that my kids can have it. Once the soup is cooked, you remove the chicken and you want to shred it up before adding it back in the pot. And this is a very simple recipe. There's not any kind of exotic flavors in this recipe. And it's creamy and really nourishing, and it feels really good when it's cold outside. And when I go to serve this recipe, I personally like red pepper flakes on my soup, but you don't have to do that. And I add some parsley and shredded Parmesan cheese, and it's delicious. The next soup I'm making here, it's another Italian recipe, and it's a Tuscan white bean soup. And it's not just white beans, because sometimes white bean soup can be vegetarian, but I also add some sausage in here and kale, and I add in sun-dried tomatoes, which are wonderful, especially in the winter, because they add a pop of summer to the food. And it's a hearty soup, and I love to serve it with some bread. And similarly to the marsala soup, it has veggies, and this time I'm doing sausage, and it has bone broth. I made some bone broth right before this, so I have some homemade bone broth to enjoy. And we have some seasonings and garlic. And once it's all put together, I reserve some of the broth and the beans, and I blend them up in the blender, and then add this back into the pot to help thicken the soup without adding flour or other thickeners. And once it's cooked, then I add in some sun-dried tomatoes and some kale, and I let the kale soften before serving. The next soup I'm doing here is a chicken tortilla soup, and you might have seen this in one of my recent videos where I was vlogging, but this is the soup recipe, and it consists of chicken, bone broth, and you can use store-bought or homemade bone broth for these recipes. And then conveniently, you just add a jar of salsa for that tomatoey flavor, and a few seasonings. And this is one of those easy slow cooker meals that you just throw all the ingredients in and then let it cook and eat later. And I love these recipes. If you've been watching my channel, I love to do slow cooker recipes because they're so easy. And if you're wondering, while I was preparing this meal, my husband was kind of talking to me a little bit, so that's why I'm kind of smiling and laughing a little bit. And then once you add all the seasonings, you're going to add some lime juice, and then I let it cook for a few hours. Then once the soup is done cooking, you're gonna remove the chicken and shred it before adding it back into the pot. You're also going to add some rice and some black beans. I personally don't like corn a lot, so I don't usually add it to my recipes like this one. This time when I made this recipe, I made some homemade baked tortilla chips, and I don't think I'm gonna go back to store-bought tortilla chips after trying these baked ones I made at home. It's really easy to make baked tortilla chips. You just bake tortillas, corn tortillas, with some oil, and you sprinkle some salt on there and maybe some lime juice if you want, and they come out so crispy and salty. The last recipe in this series is a Moroccan lamb stew, and you can make this with lamb meat or you can make it with beef. So I didn't have any lamb, so I'm making it with some beef stew meat. And you start out by browning your meat, and then you're gonna add in some veggies like carrots, and I got some onion here. And then you're gonna be adding a bunch of seasonings, and you might not have all these seasonings. I know sometimes it's hard to source like some of these more exotic type of seasonings, but you want to do as many as you can to get that authentic flavor. And then you also want to grate some ginger in there and give it a good stir, and you're going to let that cook for a little bit. Then you're going to add in some diced tomatoes, and I add about 3 cups of diced tomatoes and some bone broth, and then a little bit of apple cider vinegar. Oh, and also some bay leaf and a cinnamon stick. And then you're gonna place that in the oven and let that cook for an hour or so before you remove it. Once you do remove it from the oven, you're gonna give it another stir, just check on it. And you're gonna add in some dried apricots. And I accidentally added them in whole, but I recommend chopping them up before adding to the soup. Otherwise, you're just gonna get big chunks of apricots, so I don't recommend that. And then once everything's cooked, you're going to add in some chickpeas, give that a good stir, and make sure to thicken the soup if it's not already thick. And I do that by adding some tapioca starch. You could also do some arrowroot powder, and you want to add it slowly. You don't want to dump a whole bunch in, or else it's going to clump. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll have the links for all the recipes in the description box below. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys again soon. Be well, guys.